Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe. Now introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Caines, and Ed Mann.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. My name's Ed Mann, and today we're very lucky to be joined by fellow MyBuilder developer, Neal Brooks. How you doing, Neal?
Hi, Ed. You're too kind to be saying that you're lucky. It's a pleasure to be here.
Are you joking? I'm very lucky, very lucky. I can't believe that I've known you kind of on and off now for 4 years, and we finally get to work together. So it's been great getting you on the team.
Thank you very much. It's again, that's very kind of you to say. I feel overwhelmed and excited, and very lucky to be part of what a great team that we are here.
Awesome, yeah. So, because how long have you been working there? It's probably been a month. Is it coming on to a month?
Yeah. I think it is. It's a month this week.
Awesome. And I always love doing this. Kind of, especially when talking, for the first time on the podcast. How did you get into programming? What was your way into this lovely world? Okay, so I was always tinkering about with computers when I was a kid. I don't think. Do you mean tinkering as in breaking? Because that's mine. Putting them, pulling them apart and then trying to put them back together and going, I'm very sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I used to play with. I was thinking earlier with QBasic when I was really young. So young people won't even know what that is, but you can look it up on Wikipedia easily enough. And then when you talk about breaking, before I kind of really understood what video drivers and things were, I managed to break our Windows 3.1 computer by installing a video driver that just didn't work at all.
You were trying to make it better.
I was. I had no idea what a video driver was or what it did. But what I managed to do was memorize every single key press on the keyboard to get to where I wanted to be, so that if it did break, I could go back and reset it completely headless in a GUI environment. And managed to reset it to what it had been before.
That is something to put on the CV, sir.
So that was that was kind of interesting to do because my mother would have screamed at me if she'd found out I'd broken the computer.
Oh, that's brilliant. And so over the time then QBasic and everything, and I mean obviously introduction then to PHP. When did that come in?
So PHP came. I guess I had a fork in the road when I was first learning to program. So it was always a hobby, doing HTML and CSS. And you get to a point where you think, well, there's not a lot more I can do with this. I want to do exciting things where something's going to happen if I click a button on a form, then start emailing things rather than just opening up a mail to link or whatever. So started thinking about how I could build login systems, and the fork in the road was, do I learn PHP or do I go down the Microsoft route and learn ASP and the .NET framework? In fact, I think the .NET framework was just about coming out at the time, and being a poor type on minimum wage at the time, I thought, well, I can't afford the Microsoft licenses, so we'll have to go down the free and open source route.
And that seems to have done pretty good for you. Yeah,
it has done me pretty well. I certainly enjoy being part of the open source community and giving back as well. So that's one of the big things, which I think had I gone down the more corporate route, then maybe that wouldn't be so much of a part of what I'm doing these days.
Absolutely. And so you started, was there any did you do uni, kind of go through that route, or was it very, very much in your own time, learning PHP and then getting the first job, getting your foot in the door?
It was the second option there. I didn't go to university, regrettably, so I'm making up for that now. So studying with the Open University, completely out of my field as well. I'm studying science rather than anything to do with computing right now. So everything was always as a hobby, and I applied for every single computing job that I could get as a junior, as technician, as programming, etc., whilst all the time sort of volunteering for different tech companies, trying to learn as much as I could. And then eventually I had a break by meeting the right kind of people, and I worked for a couple of years in a PR firm, just putting together basic PHP and jQuery websites for events that were happening, and then sort of moved on from there. So that was the foot in the door, was just meeting the right person who had a project at the right time.
How did Symphony come into your life then? Because I know that me and you kind of reminisced a bit about Codeigniter a couple of weeks back. So obviously that must have come before Symphony, or did it?
They landed on my lap at pretty much the same time, actually. So at this PR company I was at, I had an intern. We took on an intern from a French university, and he was obviously all for Symphony. Symphony being a French originated framework. So he kept saying, I want to try Symphony. I said, okay, let's try out Symphony. And when it came to it, I was, at the time, I was kind of sort of ignorant as to how little I knew myself about things. And Symphony was just way over my head. And this was Symphony 1.4. And it was beyond what I could understand. And he said to me, okay, we'll try this out, and showed me Codeigniter. And Codeigniter was a lot simpler to get my head around the concepts of MVC and sort of abstracting things and decoupling where possible. So that was some time ago now. I mean, Symphony 2 has been out for much longer.
How many developers do you think have started off and actually learned MVC through Codeigniter? It's got to be a fair whack.
I would assume so. I mean, I still have a soft spot for it. I don't think I haven't looked at Codeigniter for a number of years, but I'd be interested to see what its kind of usage base is now, and how big it is in the community.
I think what I last remember is Codeigniter 3 was a thing, and then I think a lot of the steam and a lot of the direction now is gone with Symphonies and the Laravels of the world. But I was like you, and the user guide, the documentation around Codeigniter was great, and I was just like loving it, and I lapped it up, and it was the first framework that I just got stuff done in, and it felt rewarding every time I used it. Like there was a little resistance every time I needed to do something. I was able to just do it, and I think that really helps with the learning. Is that you don't feel like there's lots of like blocks in the road. You feel like you can get stuff done with it. Although it may have given some bad practices and stuff, it was a great learning experience. I definitely take away from that framework.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. In fact, as you're speaking about it now, I'm thinking about what the documentation used to be like, and thinking, this get, and then DB or whatever, and it's
yes,
database query builder on top of that. It was great. I loved it. It was a very good introduction to the world of frameworks for me. So as I say, Codeigniter and Symphony kind of both arrived at the same time on my plate. And I enjoyed using them both. I think moving from Codeigniter to Symphony made me feel a little bit more like I was progressing in the world of things. If I could get my head around Symphony at the time, then I thought I was better than I had been 3 weeks beforehand, for example.
And then obviously then Symphony 2 came out, and then everything changed. The whole game changed again. And then we've almost had that now with Symphony 4 as well. Symphony 3 kind of in the middle, has kind of been slowly progressing. We're talking a lot about Symphony here, and that's because, drum roll, you've got a talk coming up at SymfonyLive London, and hopefully a lot of the audience that were listening to this now have already listened to your talks, heard your talk, seen you at the conference. And what is the talk that you're currently you're going to be presenting on Friday?
Okay. Well, yeah. Let's hope that after seeing the talk on Friday, they do still want to listen to the podcast and me talking. So the talk is going to be about, or was about, if...
I'm trying to think what tense can we do this in, but we're recording this a couple of days before. I think the mystique's gone there.
Yeah, let's go past tense. The talk was about how to run Symphony on AWS Lambda. So getting rid of EC2 boxes and having a web server that's going to serve your PHP application only when it needs to be there. So if you've got a request coming in, or if you've got a cron job that needs running, you're not paying for a box to be running all the time, regardless if you use it or not. It's going to be a box that you get charged for whilst it's handling your data, and that's it.
And you get all that beautiful, like obviously in the Lambda world with function as a service, AWS goodness. For people in the audience, a lot of I've been a big proponent of Lambda, and there's been a lot of Lambda stuff going on, serverless stuff going on over the years and stuff. And one of the obviously bigger missions was PHP. And obviously you're saying you're bridging that gap there. We actually spoke to Andy Rains late last year, and he kind of started that talk, started that kind of discussion about here's a possibility of how we would bring PHP into the Lambda world. But yeah, what drew you then to Lambda?
Well, two things. I think first of all, as a developer, it's my job to try to minimize the costs of things I'm developing. So if I'm developing something that needs to be run on a huge box with a load of memory and uses up all of the CPU all the time, then I'm doing my job badly. And so this is kind of a natural extension, I think, of trying to minimize costs to the business or to whoever pays the bills. In that, if I can have something I'm only charged for whilst it's running, then that's got to be the better way of doing things in that. And certainly for my own personal sites that I'm hosting, I think I can save about £100 a month on my AWS bill.
That is insane.
It's one of those things that I haven't gone back and revisited and refactored for about.
I remember when you told me about your AWS bill, and I thought, man, what do you run? What do you run?
Well, I think it's about 3 websites, but they have load balancers which are each costing me $20 a month just so I can support the SSL. And in the past couple of years, I'm sure there's been cheaper ways of doing that have come out. But it's having time to go back and refactor them and keep up to date with what's happening. And I think the second reason that I've kind of been drawn to Lambda is because, also sort of PHP on Lambda, is because it's an interesting thing that we can do, as engineers and developers and as curious people and early adopters. What we do is we take things that shouldn't work together and we ram them in
until they work.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we do. That's one of the things that's exciting is trying to overcome a problem. And I'm going to throw a quote in here, actually. So George Mallory, one of the first guys that really tried to climb Mount Everest, he was obsessed with it. And they said to him in an interview, why are you obsessed with climbing Mount Everest? And he just said, because it's there. And it didn't work out too well for him. He died and his body wasn't found for about 80 years afterwards. But yeah, that's it. That's the second reason. It's because it's a challenge to get this thing working.
And it feels like PHP is a great language. I remember speaking to Andy about it. It's like, it does feel like PHP, the request, response request lifecycle of PHP is very much entwined with how a Lambda works. It's got a simple interface. You get your request in, you do something with it in the Lambda and you return. And the tear up and tear down with PHP that's what it does. That's its job. Yeah, I really hope one day it will be officially supported. But until then, there's been a lot of work, as we've briefly discussed about it and everything. And one of those projects is called Breath, and that's actually what you're going to be talking about in your in your talk, aren't you?
Well, what I did talk about in the talk.
That's true. I am really bad at this past and present tense stuff.
Yes, it is. Yes. So there's a project which was announced in May, I think it was, earlier this year, 2018, by a chap in France called Mathieu Napoli. I've probably mispronounced his name. I'm very sorry if I have. And I saw the post come out on Medium, and at the time I was looking for PHP support on Lambda at my previous company, because we had some scaling issues, but also some monetary issues where ultimately what we were doing was making too many requests to our server and DDoSing it about 2 or 3 times a week. So every other day, we just didn't have the capacity to scale up. But then if we put lots and lots of boxes behind a load balancer, we're paying for stuff we never used, and we were a startup, we just didn't have time to start configuring auto-scaling rules and auto-scaling groups etc. So I was looking for a way of running PHP on Lambda, realized it wasn't happening because AWS didn't support it. And then this post came out on Medium about how some guy had been running this website called returntrue.win, which I'd seen a couple of weeks beforehand, which was just a programming quiz. And that he'd served like 250,000 requests a week or something like that on PHP and Lambda, and he'd documented it really well, given a great overview of actually what was happening. And I read it and my jaw just dropped, because there was this thing that he'd created that was so easy, or seemingly so easy to get to grips with, but so useful, and was kind of the holy grail of what we were trying to achieve.
And the way that he's been able to abstract away a lot of kind of the pain points, because under the hood, obviously, it's still running just what AWS can support, which is actually, in this case, a Node.js app. So it's a Node.js handler that then you're going to have to call out to an executable, PHP executable that's been compiled for the Amazon Linux Linux distribution that's actually running Lambda. So there's a lot of work under the hood and stuff that it's able to get away from. You've actually, you've played around with it now a lot and everything, and you playing around with serverless and stuff. How have you found the experience since you found it to like now? Can you see this project definitely taking more and going further?
Well, I think so. I mean, I should point out that there are other projects that are aiming to achieve the same thing, and there are a few resources on how to, a few different articles and tutorials on how to do it yourself. And they pretty much all revolve around, they say the same thing, that you have to download the Amazon AMI for the Lambda and compile PHP against it, and then create a deployment package with a JS handler, which invokes your PHP binary to then start running the application. And what Bref does is takes care of all of that for you as a serverless framework plugin. And then you supply a handler and adapter file using PSR7 that gives you a nice interface to the entry point to your own application. So with that said, I mean, it's been very easy after a few kind of small learning curves and sort of reading the documentation and submitting a few documentation patches back. I've found that it's actually got a lot easier to work with as time moves on. And I can deploy a Bref application with minimal code now, minimal fussing and interference, and I think it's very easy. Once you kind of get your head around the initial concepts of it and what's going on, it's very, very easy to be able to use and deploy with.
And I think also, like, the fundamental, obviously, it would be nice if PHP was native, but the fundamental that you're able to compile a binary and run it in a Lambda environment is super powerful anyway. I remember like last year playing around with, I don't know if it's FFmpeg or something. I was playing around with some like kind of changing some audio up, and I was able to compile a binary for Lambda and actually run that and invoke that in its environment. So you could see a lot of other use cases that, that kind of, work will be able to get you into and stuff, being able to use this in a serverless manner. So although it'd be great if it's native, it's great, kind of power in Lambda that we can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good. It's quite exciting, the kind of possibilities that this opens up anyway for those of us that can't be bothered to compile the PHP binary or kind of want a centralized project.
Exactly. And you shouldn't have to, should you? You shouldn't have to compile. And if everyone's doing it and they say, that's the beauty of this project, where it's been able to abstract away all this stuff and it gives you just a very clean, command line interface to be able to do a whole host of things. And it also seems a winning point of this seems to be the fact that it has many adapters for popular frameworks. Yeah. Would you mind maybe going into some depth about what these adapters are and how they work with all the different frameworks?
Yeah, sure. So as I say, the entry point to the application is something that you provide yourself. There are examples of it. We've got examples for Slim and Laravel and Symphony frameworks. So those three are kind of supported out of the box now with the Bref system. So if you've got an application that's running on any of those the three kind of popular frameworks there, then you support straight away is going to be pretty good. I think the guy that first wrote Bref is using Slim more than anything else. That's the kind of feel that I get from some of the comments that he's made. So if you're using Slim, then happy days. I mean, personally, I've only worked on the Symfony adapter, and we've had one or two issues on the Symfony side of things, which is a bit strange, to be honest, because Symfony is all for interoperability and decoupling and making things easy to work. But we had a few issues with the session handling and a couple of issues with Twig as well. For some reason, Twig keeps trying to write to the cache even when you've set the cache not to be writable. So there are a few... even when you've pre-compiled the cache. So there are a couple of issues that we've run into with Symfony, but for all intents and purposes, you can pretty much run any application, any Symfony application out of the box now.
Absolutely, and you've been very good at kind of spearheading, getting these PRs in, getting them merged in and stuff. So with Symfony, then, so with these frameworks, you bring a framework to the fight. You've got a whole host of stuff there. How does the process work then to actually get this deployed? So I'm guessing you're going to have to compile the cache first because this, essentially the Lambda wants to be immutable, and you don't want to do anything in the Lambda as such. You just want its nice one artifact. How does that work then in Breath?
Well, the idea is, there is a writable file system on Lambda, but it's the /temp directory, which is obviously different to where Symfony wants to write the cache to. But you don't really want to be caching on the Lambda environment. There's no point to it. You don't know if you're ever going to get that cache back, and if it's a function as a service, then what's the point of compiling a cache on the request to read back from? So what you need to do is pre-compile the cache on your local before the artifact gets uploaded to Lambda. So the deploy process makes a copy of all of the important bits of code. So you define in your serverless.yaml file what it is that you need to be uploaded to the Lambda. Breath deployment process then takes that, makes a copy of it, it runs any scripts that you define. So in Symfony's case, it's compiling the cache, also compiling any assets and putting the JavaScript together, and then sends it all up to Lambda, and then also creates an API gateway system around it so that you can it gives you an endpoint to be able to call and get your application through the World Wide Web.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The good www. So, because actually it was very interesting, because you did mention there, like we had some issues with Symfony sessions, and there was you did a lot of good detective work there to try and work out why that was. And it did seem, because PHP, because obviously you're compiling PHP and you're running PHP in like a CLI environment, the way that this Breath package or this Breath, project works is that it uses the beautiful PSR7 standard. You provide it with a request into Symfony. Symfony will return back a nice response for you, and you can just send that back to API Gateway. It did seem, though, that the way that Symfony currently, and this is probably something to discuss with Symfony Core, the way they do native session handling is they take advantage of the way that PHP does sessions, because that's just a great way. PHP does sessions for you, easy peasy. But it kind of side channels the fact that if I'm trying to create a session to set the cookie, because that was the issue you were having, wasn't it? Where it wasn't returning the cookie. It was always, just saying, oh, no. And then it was obviously always creating a new session. So it seems like it doesn't honor the PSR7 returning of the set cookie. And that's something then, in the adapter that you had to address. But once that's done, then you've got, you're plain sailing.
Yeah, the code for that was kind of hacky, which obviously you then took and made a PR which just tidied things up a lot. So thank you to your contribution to that. But it was very surprising that Symfony didn't return the set cookie header, especially as when I raised the issue on the project's GitHub page that the session handling wasn't being honored. People using other frameworks going, well, it works for me. Why doesn't it work for you?
And then that's when you go, oh, I'm on my own. You always want to be part of the crowd that's in the problem. So one person's going to solve it.
But the first thing that creeps into your head is, what am I doing wrong? It's not necessarily why isn't this working with Symfony. It's why can't I?
What am I missing?
Can't I do it? Yeah. But yeah, that was a very strange kind of case again, because you'd expect Symfony to be doing things So to have this very defined, this is what we need, let's return it in the PSR7 response. That's not.
Well, you wonder if people have been burnt by it before, because it seems, because it's using the PHP kind of, internals of it. It's able to, it sets the cookie on the header response and stuff. So when it sends it and everything. So, it's kind of, again, sideloading the fact that I'm setting a cookie. Oh, I'm also returning this PSR7 response that doesn't have the set cookie in. And essentially that's the patch that you have to do, is you have to say, oh, by the way, if the session's changed, add this set cookie in here, because, you're not going to get this back. And it shows up and highlights very much so in an environment like using it in the CLI in this way, Lambda, is because everything has to go back to API gateway as a response for it to actually return. So you're just kind of none the wiser if you don't actually deal with it this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a difficult one to debug, I think, as I say, because it was just unexpected. So, but I have to assume that somebody in the Symfony project would have at least considered this at some point, and there must be a reason why it's being omitted from the PSR7 response. But there's an element of bravery which I don't yet have to be able to say to Symfony project, you guys are doing this wrong. So
I say do it, mate. If you do it, you're now going to one of the Symfony Lives. You're a talker. You're now a speaker at one of these conferences.
It's true. Maybe by the time that this goes out to the audience, I'll have nudged Fabian in the.
That's it. You've leveled up
and told him to sort it out. Let's see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen with that at the moment.
You're basing the whole talk around an example app. Would you mind explaining kind of what this app is, and then we can go into really the meat of it, which is how the hell you get everything done?
Yeah, sure. So the app is a combination of two of my greatest loves in life. One is puns and the other one is cats. And we combine them through the medium of quotes, of famous quotes. So the application is a website called kittyquotes.net, and it's just pictures of cats, some of my cats, some of cats that I made the mistake of asking on the internet for pictures of people's cats, and I got hundreds of responses, and of course
people love taking pictures of their cats and sharing them, don't they?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake on my part to do that, because everybody.
Have you included all these pictures, or have you just filtered them down?
I'm halfway through adding them.
Oh dear.
So it's pictures of cats along with quotes by such famous people as Isaac Newton or Friedrich Nietzsche and these kinds of people. I kept coming up with quotes and authors until my intelligence ran out, and I had to ask other people to contribute some for me as well. So there are more to come at the moment.
And maybe more on the day.
Yes, so that's the idea. But it also kind of, I'm going to be like that cat lady from The Simpsons when I get older. Because I did a demo a couple of years ago on Blackfire, and I set up a website called kittyonline.net for that as well. I think everything I'm doing.
Are you just trying to get the whole kitty domain space? Just keep, hoard all over it?
I think I might be. Or maybe it's just, these are just my ways of sharing my pictures of my cat with the unsuspecting public. I don't know.
Oh, but by the means of learning and education, I will show you my cat.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But I think, it is a great example, though, because you mentioned there, so you've got pictures, so you've got uploads, you've got the ability to, post things, add things, view things, show things, all the stuff that you typically do in sessions, obviously, admin interfaces and stuff. I was brand new to Bref when I first met you. This was something that, you showed the light to me too. And it was great last week, actually, for, we did this SymfonyLive competition form. We built it all using Bref, all using the latest Symfony 4 stuff. And it was a great, humbling experience. Firstly, getting back into the Symfony 4, Symfony stuff in general, learning, doing all that fun stuff again. And really, taking advantage of Bref and the fact that it's serverless, the fact that it's dealing with a lot of the headache and overhead for you. You don't have to set up a server. You can just let it spin it up, let it do its job, and then, custom domain and whatnot. Firstly, what is the experience like then using Symfony locally, and then obviously you're going to be deploying it to Lambda, and then the debug information and dealing with the flow of typical development?
Yeah. Okay. So the local development doesn't really change too much. There's an entry point, which I keep talking about, to your application, which you can run as the entry point on your local development server. You can point the local server to that and get a kind of Lambda-esque environment. But it's actually a lot more forgiving than Lambda is itself. So you might find that something works really, really well through this entry point. But then once you've uploaded it, then things are very, very different and things blow up. So what I've found is that I tend to deploy and then use CloudWatch logs. I mean, all of your logging, all of your error output, everything goes into CloudWatch now. So you can either keep refreshing the CloudWatch console in your web browser, or you can run a command that's supplied with Bref, which is just Bref logs, and that will fetch the latest CloudWatch logs for you and show you what's going on with your application when you're trying to click around with it. So that's the biggest change, really, in terms of the error feedback. You don't have the Symfony debug environment, or you can get the debug environment to work, but there's a little bit more setup in that, which will probably come in a blog post at some point rather than going into it now.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the other kind of real big changes are, obviously you have to be thinking more about your application not having any state. So everything else needs to be extracted away from that. So session handling has to be done in the database, for example.
It really brings that 12-factor out, doesn't it, to the crux of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've really got to be thinking in a true serverless kind of way and break everything down into its smallest, most micro kind of version. And image uploads as well is worth mentioning, because although multi-part form data uploads are supported, they're kind of not great. And of course, like with Lambda, there's a maximum file size for the entire package and everything it's handling anyway. But if you want to really handle uploads well, then you need to be thinking way, way, way outside of the box of using sort of uploader bundles and uploading to the local file system on the server. You need to be doing things like pre-sign requests and uploading to CDNs instead of directly to the server.
So like using like S3 pre-signed and stuff instead, and really just letting AWS deal with the problem, because to be honest, that's something you just don't care about, isn't it? And then you can obviously then use like events back into the beautiful Lambda world.
Well, of course, yeah. So I don't care where, as a developer, I don't really care where the images are as long as they're in a place that I can put them and I can retrieve them, and it's secure.
All secure, all safe, yeah.
So to a degree, I do care where they go, but also as long as it does the job that it should do, I don't care I don't care if they're on a web server or on a CDN or whatever. It just means that they have to be on a CDN if I'm using Bref. But yeah, so you mentioned events there. So yeah, if I upload a file, maybe I upload a video that needs some post-processing or something on it. Now, obviously, you can't do that during, maybe like in a large PHP application, you might have that uploaded to the server and then do that as part of the request response cycle, which obviously wouldn't be a great thing to do, but you could do it. But in terms of Lambda, you can't do that. That option is completely out the window. So you can obviously emit an event after S3 and listen to that with a Lambda function. You'd traditionally do that in Java or Python, so yeah, you would need to be able to handle those and listen to events and react upon them in your PHP world as well. And this is kind of new ground at the moment for me in doing this. It's certainly possible to schedule cron events, and it would be possible to react to events coming in. If you had some listeners on an SQS queue, for example, firing Lambda functions, you can run Symfony commands through Lambda and pass in parameters as well. But I'm not sure at the moment about how that works with SNS notifications and getting the event data from that. That's not something I've gone into too much at the moment, but I think the possibility is definitely there.
That would be like the ideal then, wouldn't it? You know, I think we were talking about yesterday where, you know, obviously they've nailed the API gateway events, bringing that in, abstracting it, and then passing it to PHP in a way that can be handled and returned. Next, it really would be to be able to do the object created events in the S3 world, and like you say, the SNS, SQS events and stuff. You can kind of envision, that you'll be able to, have this object, uploaded and then run a Symfony command, providing in this input saying, oh, by the way, here's the file that you need to update, you edit and replace or do changes with or whatnot in another, and it'll be in a completely asynchronous manner.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things about it, actually, if we can solve this, is the ability to have your domain objects all written in the same language, all having the same domain invariants, the same rules, the same constructs, all the way through your entire application pipeline. So I'd be able to have maybe in PHP a class that describes a video object, for example, and I know that I can use that video object on my application, so the front end that the user interacts with, but also wherever I'm using that doing post-processing, I know that I've got a PHP object that's always valid because it's been valid as it's been passed through the pipeline. I don't need to recode that in Python to do Python processing, for example, through Lambda. If I can do that processing in PHP on Lambda, then it means that I've got completely reusable domain objects all the way through in the same language.
Absolutely. And I think doing the exercise we did last week with the Symfony form stuff or SymfonyLive competition stuff, there was two things that kind of were how are we going to deal with this? And then you came to the table with all, with your breath and everything. And it was like, oh, this is pretty easy. One of them was handling assets. Now that's a big one. You use Webpack Encore now, you compile the assets locally, you give them to you'll say, okay, I'm going to upload this Lambda now. And you realize, it has no idea where these assets are. This is not your typical document route. And the other one then is migrations, dealing with, like, say, a database. So, in the world in AWS, you'd use RDS. But how do I run these migrations? So it'd be good maybe. So firstly, how have you handled assets in the world of Lambda and PHP and Symfony?
Well, that's actually pretty well documented on the Symfony website anyway, is using assets with a CDN, and you just need to configure Webpack Encore to look in the right place. So in Webpack Encore, you just tell it that you're in production mode and you want some versioning, and then there's a YAML file somewhere. Again, it's mentioned in the documentation. There's a YAML file somewhere. You just say, look, this is where the assets are going to be. So you can either hard code that or put an environment variable in, which is going to be the better way to do things. And then when you deploy, you need to get those assets up to S3. And there is a plugin that we used for this, a serverless framework plugin called Serverless S3 Assets. And we defined the bucket in the serverless.yaml. Again, using environment variables so it knows where to look. In fact, it was the same environment variable that's in both the YAML file for the assets and also for the serverless plugin. And that then becomes part of the deployment process. So once we hit deploy, that then creates the bucket, uploads everything we need to in there, and then does the rest of the Lambda deployment package. So that's everything created there, and then instantly things start working on the front end, and we have our JavaScripts and we have our CSS files all included.
And everything looks pretty.
Everything looks lovely again. And then with the migrations, we have a feature in Bref. Again, it's the Bref file. So you call vendor bin Bref, and then you just have a CLI option. And then you call the Symfony command that you want to run after that. So it's you invoke it locally in your terminal just with Bref CLI, and then put in the name of the Symfony command you want to run, so you can run your migrations. And it goes and it invokes your Lambda function on Lambda, so you've got access to all of your production environment variables and your remote connection to your database and everything. But it just then reports back to you the status of what's happened once it's gone and done that. So that's all very, very easy. In fact, running commands on Bref is one of the easiest things that you can.
I think that's been the best abstraction I've seen, and because I was thinking there's going to be so much pain doing that, and then when you showed me how the ability you could just run this migration on local, and it would actually obviously spin it up, go into Lambda, pull down, get the contents, everything, and it's like you're running just SSHing into a box. There is nothing magic about it, which is so cool. Or there is a lot of magic about it, but there's nothing special that you have to kind of cognitively think of.
Absolutely. I can't begin to describe how simple it is, to be honest. It's a very, very useful tool.
Well, it makes up for the session problems. All these things balance out, don't they, in the end? And obviously, it's underlining, it's using the serverless framework, which I'm a big fan of. And with that, then you get like the hosts have been able to use like resources. And, when you do deploys, you can then use infrastructure as code and then use like things like CloudFormation. Obviously, serverless has abstracted away quite a lot of it with you getting the API gateway in for you and whatnot. But, a couple of things that you did with the CloudFormation stuff was, you created like an S3 bucket and stuff. And I in the SymfonyLive competition stuff, we also did it with RDS and whatnot. How did you find kind of, using that kind of way, the infrastructure as code and obviously seeing that, work and deploy it and work in production?
Well, actually before getting to grips with Bref, I'd never used the serverless framework before. I've always been clicking around in the AWS console. There are DevOps and there are developers, and I'm not really a DevOps kind of person. I've put it off for as long as I possibly can, but I've actually found that it's been a very, very easy path to doing what I need to do. It's been quite simple to get to grips with by going through this project. I thought, well, I want to use this project. Okay, I need to understand a little bit about the serverless framework and what's happening under the hood, and how, if I change one thing, how that's going to be reflected on the deployment package and when it's all set up. So from there, it became easier. Then I think, as I say, this serverless S3 assets plugin, it became easier to find that and to start playing with the serverless framework and getting things working with that. And then when I saw what you'd managed to do with the serverless.yaml for the competition we ran, I was kind of blown away with the complexity that you can add in, but also maintain readability. And I think I can go through that and understand everything that you're doing and why. And it makes it low. I think it lowers the barrier to entry for doing.
Oh, yes.
Which is obviously never a bad thing.
No, absolutely. And infrastructure as code, like defining everything that needs to happen in code form, committing that, and then running that. It just, as you say, like, it lowers the barrier to entry. It stops any confusion. It stops having these snowflake servers, these snowflake setups, these, little pets and cat. You have the cattle and pet, analogy and stuff that you have to worry about and nurture. Your ability to be able to just tear up and tear down these resources, these infrastructures is just so invaluable. And things, like CloudFormation in this, and being able to build up this little environment, and literally you can just see that repo and you see all the infrastructure as well around it, which is a lot, because as you say, like, you're doing RDS, you use an API gateway, you use an S3, all these things around it are now defined in this very concrete manner, and you can give it to anyone and they can easily understand it. And it's not like, oh, by the way, here's a README with all the other infrastructure bits that you have to worry about.
Yeah, and I don't have to give anybody a Vagrant file anymore.
Oh, yes, back in the day. It would be interesting maybe to go into some of the API gateway stuff. So API gateway is obviously, used then for HTTP requests then into your Lambda. How does Breadth deal with this then? Like, how does it pass the actual thing to, say, like the Symfony application or the application in question? What kind of routes does it take? Because I suppose does it do like a catch-all, I'm guessing, to be able to pipe that all requests to that single Lambda?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So if you're familiar with API gateway, which I'm assuming a number of your listeners are, you'd know that Amazon requires you to have a stage name on the end of your route unless you're using a custom domain name. That's the only kind of gotcha that we have there, and that's well documented in the Bref documentation, is that you need to have /dev in your routes until you provide a custom domain name. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. So what happens is there's a catch-all route, which then just acts as a Lambda proxy, as it's known in AWS world. So the request just gets proxied all the way to your Lambda function. A handler.js, which is provided for you by the Bref package, converts that into a format that's then called against the PHP binary. The PHP binary does what it wants and hands all of the output back to that handler.js, and handler.js is then responsible for sending that back through the API gateway to the client.
And it's interesting because obviously then essentially what this is doing then is delegating the routing to a framework or to Symfony, because what API gateway does now is really kind of just dumbly proxy it back and forth. And I can see that being a pro and a con. Like it was interesting because before we did this experiment last week, I was definitely in the camp of multiple API gateway endpoints with single purpose Lambdas. Done a lot of experimenting with like this mince pie challenge thing. And I was like, yep, no, that's the way, the serverless way in quotes, to scale up and down, because the idea there is you obviously, if you have a hot endpoint, single endpoint, maybe things are being posted a lot, that Lambda can scale at will as it wants. And it doesn't have to worry about anything else. And it's only got code related to that single execution. I still stand behind that as an advantage, and definitely the way of thinking is good. But I can understand, and I think, because of the way that breadth and because of the way you were able to explain it and really show off how easy it is to get this kind of process where I'm using Symfony, I'm using tooling that I already know. As Symfony developers, as PHP developers, as developers in general, you've got frameworks, you've got problems that you need to solve. And to not reinvent the wheel, just use the framework, use the tooling that you already have. And the ability to be able to just, run that, do the local stuff, literally bring it into the Lambda world, serverless world, I can really see the value in that, because the pros, although you're not getting the routing and obviously the pros you're getting are the fact that I can see for small websites that probably don't get that many hits. I mean, the competition thing isn't exact like this. Like it'll have a couple of spikes maybe throughout the day, but you're not going to get consistent hits every second. Being able to just to deploy it, and even if it's all getting hit by one endpoint, it's just a couple of pages, a brochure-ish type website, I can really see the value in the pricing model and the performance and the development, kind of happiness in doing that. So yeah, I can definitely, I'm definitely two sides. I can see for bigger applications, definitely single purpose Lambdas are the way to go. But for bringing it over and maybe like small specific websites, like, brochure websites, like, like these competition forums, etc., providing the tooling you already have is great. And, you can definitely, one of the things is once you've learned the tool, I understand like choosing the right tool for the job, but PHP and Symfony are great tools for these things, and they've got a host of other things. Testing, it's heavily good code, heavily audited code. Everything's been, tried and true and tested. So you might as well stand on the on the shoulders of giants in that regard.
Well, there's no reason to think that you couldn't have multiple endpoints in API Gateway and have a separate Symfony package behind each of those. If you wanted to have routing separately in API Gateway, I think that's it would be more work, I think, to set up.
Yeah, because you could probably slice and dice it. I suppose, I mean, to be honest, even in just the case of, bare bones, using PHP with these single endpoints is definitely possible. I think bringing a framework into it, obviously it has its own rules around how it wants to do routing and stuff. But again, these are tried, true, tested routing platforms and stuff that people know. And if you're trying to port an application over, small applications over, or you're just trying to experiment and to get the pricing, benefits. I mean, that's actually something we haven't spoken about. So, the pricing around Lambda, how does that work? Obviously, you said that you're going to save quite a bit of money, quite a bit in quotes there, from your EC2 model and stuff. How does it work, and how is it comparable then, say, to an EC2 instance?
You're going to ask me something I'm going to answer without knowing all of the facts and figures. But I think the way of looking at it, as mentioned by my friend and fellow developer Lucas Courreau in France, is that it's like owning your own car or getting an Uber. If you own your own car, you're paying for it all the time, but each journey, respectively, then is cheaper. If all you do is get Uber, then if you're getting it everywhere and using it as if it were your bus to work and home and everything, then you're going to end up spending more money. So to be honest, I simply don't know, because I haven't deployed it to any huge websites that are experiencing constant hits all the time. So I don't know how. I don't have any hard figures to be able to say how that is. But I think that if anybody was considering it, it would be prudent to kind of look at how much money is being spent on multiple EC2 boxes versus the return that you're getting on those, along with your load balancers and other things that are costing you amounts of money. So a load balancer is $18 a month per balancer that you have. And of course, if you're assigning If you're only using that to get the free SSL, then you're paying for your SSL certificate in load balancer costs anyway. So that's not actually saved you any money. But if you go down the API gateway route, then you are getting the SSL certificate for free because the API gateway is costing you nothing really at all. And then the Lambda is costing you nothing really at all. And you've got instant scalability with Lambda, and you don't have the worries of investing time and effort into creating auto-scaling groups or rules or anything like that, or launching multiple EC2 boxes. I think anybody that's considering it, just has to kind of think, well, is this going to work for us? Is it a cost-effective decision? Are there ways that we can leverage this to perform maybe the stuff that we have issues with scaling with, and still run one or two boxes, whatever, for nominal cheapness on some of the other bits and pieces? It comes down to individual use cases, I think.
And the fact that you don't have to provision a box, I mean, that's something, again, that really is a game changer. You know, the abstraction level now is for developers like us to be able to, without having to do DevOpsy stuff, without having to provision stuff, really. I mean, obviously you're provisioning on a high level these different infrastructures and stuff through, you know, CloudFormation, but the ability to not have to install updates on a fundamental operating system, you know, install PHP, make sure it's keeping up to date, all this. I mean, I suppose PHP obviously is one of the things we have to do in this case, but fundamentals are like Node and Python and Go and whatever, that they handle all that for you.
I don't have to SSH into a server and do apt-get update and maintain security packages, et cetera, which I would have to do with an EC2 box. Yeah.
And you just let the pros deal with that. Let AWS have that problem, and you get your business value, you know, where you're going to make the money and where, you know, your you know, kind of passion and, you know, real true value lies is in the code and shipping and deploying it. And yeah, the spikes and stuff and what Lambda can deal with, you know, is astronomically great. And, you know, the fact you don't have to provision stuff beforehand, you don't have to kind of think, oh, hang on, how much spike, how much traffic am I going to get, you know, in this kind of this offset or something. So yeah, as you say, I really do love that analogy though, that you say about the Uber and the car, owning your own car, because you couldn't word it even any better. That's such a true kind of analogy for it.
I just wish I'd come up with that myself.
I thought you did.
No.
So you completely you swerved me.
Yeah. I just mentioned his name really quickly, and everybody.
Oh dear. But yeah, obviously we've spoken about the pricing and everything, and then it's performance. Obviously performance is a big thing, and implications of using Lambda. So does using Lambda kind of come with free performance, or is that something you're probably going to have to base some, you know, decisions on and really think about?
Well, of course. I mean, the first thing is, like, we're not running PHP natively. We're running it as a binary within Lambda, which is being invoked by something else. So there's always going to be a performance hit on that. And Matthew's own kind of benchmarks suggest that there's about a 20 millisecond performance hit for running PHP on top of Node. So just the cost of invoking the binary within the Lambda gives you about a 20 millisecond hit, which I think is quite acceptable for the majority of things. I mean, and you can always implement API level caching on API gateway and take other steps to mitigate that kind of performance hit anyway. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously cold booting, which is a bit of a nightmare, or adds to the overhead of starting up. And if you've got your Lambda running within a VPC, then a cold boot can take about 10 seconds.
So what is for the audience then? What is a cold boot?
Well, the cold booting is obviously, so you're running your function as a service. It's inside a container somewhere on one of Amazon's servers. Now, after some time, that server is going to go, well, we're going to shut this container down. And that container isn't going to exist until the next request that comes in for that. So the cold booting is going from the state of there not being a container ready to handle the request to a container being booted and ready for to handle what you're sending it. So if you have it within a VPC, which is better for security, obviously, because you can control absolutely everything that comes in and goes out, Yes, so cold boot from that. The majority of the time in that is setting up the network interface and the IPs associated with it. And that can make a cold boot take about 10 seconds. But I think that's not a Bref and PHP issue. That's a general Lambda issue, which is kind of well documented anyway. So the kind of solution to that, if you want the added security of the VPC, is to try where possible to just hit your Lambda semi-regularly just to make sure it stays warm and so that container is being used and doesn't get shut down as often by AWS.
So that would be like, say, using your scheduled like CloudWatch events and stuff and then calling the Symphony command or something.
Absolutely, yeah. Just have a ping command that returns a pong or whatever, like just as a kind of heartbeat function, which is going to cost you nothing. I mean, you get a million invocations of Lambda a month for free with AWS. So it's going to cost you absolutely nothing to do that.
That's awesome, man. And it is interesting. The VPC one was definitely a gotcha last week because I was like, great, I'll just keep the RDS instance in VPC land. And then we were like trying to hit the website and you'd get, this 8-second up to 10-second delay. And I was like, oh no, this isn't good. And then obviously, reading all the material on it and the fact that VPC, and it is, as you say, weighing up the pros and cons, for front facing stuff like that, that's probably not acceptable. But asynchronous stuff, where you're hitting, say a command and or hitting asynchronously, object created events and stuff. I think in the background, that's fine. That's acceptable kind of levels of problem. And then obviously the way to solve it, if it was front facing, would be just to use these, kind of keeping, them warm, these Lambdas warm by constantly hitting them to essentially making AWS say, hey, keep this around because it's still popular.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we're almost going up to the hour mark. Obviously, by now, the audience have heard your talk, heard you speak about lovely Lambda stuff, heard you all through this, and really want to hear more. Where can they hear from you more? I'm guessing you're on the Twitters, any blog posts, any websites, and anything to plug?
Well, I'm actually currently moving all of my sites over to using Lambda, so things are kind of here, there, and everywhere at the moment. I'm kind of picking up sites that are 5-10 years old and resurrecting some of those. So I'm kind of busy with those at the moment, and eventually I'll get around to putting my own blog back online. But you can follow me. I'm Nealio82 on Twitter, and I'll be contributing to the MyBuilder tech blog in the near future. And I'm on Medium as well. You can find me on Medium under the same handle, although I've only got the one post up at the moment, so it's not that exciting, my Medium feed. And again, GitHub, I'm the same handle everywhere. Basically just search for that handle and I'm sure you will find something.
And I'll be sure to put it all in the show notes. And we should say, actually, if you want to come work with us, because if you like, the cut of our jib and the way we've been talking about all this cool stuff, careers.mybuilder.com, we are hiring any and everyone, all tech devs, kind of all, SREs, data analysts and stuff. So yeah, definitely check it out and check out our blog at tech.mybuilder.com.
That's it. We're looking for people of all ages, abilities, shapes and sizes.
Anyone who wants to come learn with us and contribute to an awesome project that we're working on. Audience, it's been another great episode, and we'll speak to you again next week. Goodbye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.